1, 2, here.
We look at everything we do with like a National Geographic lens, and it's not sci-fi fantasy. We always look for what the real world analogy is. And designing Pandora, we always say, like Earth is super diverse. Why can't Pandora be just as diverse as Earth? And so we always, as we're doing new biomes, we have all the biomes here on Earth to explore as well.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen, in partnership with 20th Century Studios, featuring artisans who helped to create Avatar, Fire and Ash from the Oscar-winning filmmaker James Cameron. I'm your host, THR contributing editor Stacey Wilson-Hunt. My guests today are production designers Dylan Cole and Ben Procter. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Doing great. Great to be here.
And congratulations on the film. Again, it is quite an achievement. But before we talk about Fire and Ash, I did want to learn a little bit more about your journeys to this point in your careers. And I'd like to start with Ben. I would like to know, Ben, what films were most formative to you in igniting an interest to pursue production design?
That is a great question. I mean, I'm thinking of Ralph McQuarrie posters that were on the walls of my room when I was, I don't know what it was, a 9-year-old, something like that. There was this great poster pack that you could buy, beautifully printed, really big format. And I just wallpapered my room. So I think it was seeing that you can make a picture of an AT-AT walker in the snow with a tauntaun running after it. And Dylan, I know you know the exact image I'm talking about. And it's so evocative, and it scared me, right? I mean, like Empire Strikes Back was scary to a kid to watch, and has a lot of serious themes. And so I think understanding how design and imagery, gives an emotional response, and how there are people that do that. I think it took me a long time to realize more fully that there are people that do that. It was probably because I became obsessed with Blade Runner as a teenager. And then, of course, Sid Mead, the godfather of sci-fi concept design, is credited as a visual futurist in that film. And so that was like, wait a minute, that's badass. Who's this visual futurist guy? So I'd say those two things maybe were primary sparks.
I had the Ice Fortress toy as a kid where,
Nice.
it was sort of the thing and you can shoot the thing. Yeah, I do it somewhere in my parents' attic, I think.
It's
Might
like
be
a
worth a lot of money.
Nice.
And how about you, Dylan? Did you have a formative film that really not so much taught you about what the director does or what the writer does, but sort of the world building aspect of film?
Yeah, normally Ben goes straight to Aliens and Blade Runner, and I'm the Star Wars nerd. I was growing up in the 80s, and so I was a Star Wars kid for sure. And it was that, and specifically Empire Strikes Back, it was just the world building, transformative, aspirational nature of seeing these places that I just wish existed. And I just wanted to go there. Like, I desperately wanted to go to Cloud City. I wanted to be on all these different spacecraft. There was no internet, there were no resources. I was a kid in the suburbs. I had no idea how movies were made, but I always loved Star Wars. And so I wasn't really exposed much to the concept art until I was probably a teenager when the Art of Star Wars books were re-released for the special editions. And I had also picked up the Art of Special Effects from Industrial Light and Magic book. And that's where I saw traditional matte paintings. And early in my career, I was a digital matte painter, and it was really that stuff that was very formative to me. But before that, I was into comic books because I could understand how stuff was like, oh, that has a penciler and an inker. Okay, I get that. I can do that. And then it was like, science fiction illustration. It wasn't only till I realized, just other artists make movies too. And so that was my path then.
Dylan, didn't you also intern at ILM?
I did. That was a giant dream come true when I was in college. I I kind of crashed their talk when they came to UCLA. I was a fine art major, and they were speaking to the design department, which at that time was like just good old fashioned graphic design. And I totally crashed it. I showed them traditional paintings that I had done, and I hadn't even touched Photoshop or other than a computer to write papers and do emails and stuff. So I ended up getting an internship in the matte painting department based on my traditional portfolio, and promptly bought a Mac and got Photoshop and trying to frantically learn and take advantage of their wealth of knowledge.
Wow. What an incredible entree to that world. Congratulations on landing that gig, a very coveted internship, I imagine.
It was. Thanks.
And I know you both served as concept art directors on the first Avatar. How did you get that job, and what were your first impressions of working with James Cameron?
Yeah, we didn't get those jobs. Those titles were given to us as a sort of really nice honorific after the fact. We didn't expect it. We didn't know it was coming. So we saw it in the credits and we're like, oh my God, that's incredible. So technically a concept art director is a role that like the guild would normally not know what to do with that. But the way we use it, even in the departments that we've staffed for the sequels, and the way it was given to us is sort of like a way to acknowledge concept illustrators that have made in some way an outsized contribution to the design of the film. So that's kind of how we inadvertently or unknowingly, as we worked for a year and a half for me, I don't know how long you were on the show, Dylan, probably something a little bit like that.
Similar.
Made an impact slowly but surely, and got awarded that after the fact, which was great of Rob and Rick to arrange that for us. And so we figured we'd pass it to future generations.
But I think it's worth saying, like, we were both sort of like the right-hand guy to the production designer. Ben was sort of Rick's right-hand guy. I was Robert Stromberg's right-hand guy. And we were both doing a lot of concept art, but then also art directing sets a bit more than a concept artist would. I was doing a lot of the virtual set art direction. Ben, I know you were heavily involved in the practical sets and virtual as well.
Yeah. It was the first contact with the New Zealand art department, which of course now like they're our best buddies because we work with them all the time. Then it was this exotic thing of like, we're going to shoot the movie in New Zealand and we've got to interface with all these Kiwis and send all the drafting, and they use meters and we use feet, and it was a whole kind of cultural discovery that had to happen. But it was great, and it's a terrific team down there.
Yeah, for sure. And to answer the other part of your question about first meeting with Jim, mine was funny because I was working with Robert doing all the Pandora natural design stuff. First thing I was doing with the Tree of Souls, but the first painting Jim actually saw of mine was actually a painting I'd done of Earth. And so it was this, super techy, neon-y, not neon-y, but lots of advertising type of structure. I mean, and I love doing the tech design stuff. Just Ben's better. so it was super fun to do that. And I was very nervous because I was like, oh, am I going to be doing this, or am I doing the natural world stuff, or a little bit of everything? But thankfully he was receptive to it. And that was my first meeting with Earth Painting.
Well, Earth is a good point of reference for all of this, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, we always say, we look at everything we do with like a National Geographic lens, and it's not sci-fi fantasy. We always look for what the real world analogy is. And designing Pandora, we always say, like Earth is super diverse. Why can't Pandora be just as diverse as Earth? And so we always, as we're doing new biomes, we have all the biomes here on Earth to explore as well. And I always say it's kind of silly and arrogant to think in like an afternoon sketch you can do something better than millions of years of evolution and nature came up with. So it's why not start with something amazing?
Absolutely. And of course that equally applies on the technological side in that really, really smart architects, engineers, and physicists, and have been coming up with incredible equipment to achieve variety of functions over the course of human history, and to the more I look at real photos, the more I'm amazed at the things that are out there in the world right now that your average person has never seen. I come across things that I'm like a nerd. I'm the kind of person that looks at photos of oil rigs for fun. Okay. Like there's something wrong with me. And I find things that I've never seen that. And like, oh my God, that's so cool. And so we're always getting inspired by reality and trying to bring that into our film, because if our world feels real, this is what any production designer does. But I think for us, we're dealing with something that's as broad and as fantastical as the kind of stories that we're telling on this alien world, and also trying to keep it very kind of human in the sense of the emotional scale of the films, right? That's what Jim is so great at in these stories, is doing stuff that's epic and intimate and really moving at the same time. It's just that much more burden on us to make sure the world is never a distraction from that mission, right? Where the world needs to support the story and make everything feel as real as the actors are able to make these scenes feel.
Yeah, because it's in our instinct as designers to go hog wild and just do something crazy or super cool, or but then if it's distracting, it utterly fails, no matter how great it may look. We always just have to serve the story, and especially like when it comes down to like the alien design of Pandora, it can't be too alien because you need to relate to it and accept it. It needs to be hopefully wondrous and amazing, but you need to instantly get it. It's sort of like, design is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not very good.
That's a good line. That's very smart. Yeah.
I like that comparison. And sort of talking about your division of duties, Ben, you have tended to handle the human world, Earth, weapons, vehicles,
Correct.
and Dylan, all things Pandora and Navi. Are you working side by side in those moments to make sure there aren't too many incongruities with each of your approaches, and that there aren't things that are overly jarring in each of your pieces of work? How are you making sure that they have synergy?
Yeah, I mean, we're very much aware of what the other is doing. There are illustrators on the team and art directors and all kinds of different members of the art department that will be flex players who go back and forth between the human world of technology and of course, the beautiful Pandora and stuff. So there's a sort of natural mixture that happens there, and there's a heavy awareness. I mean, our offices we work from home these days, but our offices at Manhattan Beach Studios were right next to one another. So just out of creative curiosity and kind of companionship, we'd be moving around and checking one another's stuff out. But I also, and I would say in general, yes, keeping an eye on how our color palettes work, against one another and with one another to kind of create the contrast that we need. We definitely kept a strong eye on that. But the fact that we have two designers, each with a different design sensibility, is not a bad thing for what ends up in the movie, right? The fact that you've got a design universe that has like these obviously two cultures that are clashing, and that they have a sort of distinct sort of look and a distinct vision for each of those that don't fit together is kind of part of the point of the story. And so I think it has an advantage there.
Yeah, I mean, literally light years apart in origins. And so,
Exactly.
and yeah, I mean, I think we would only check in kind of as needed, not, again, like I love seeing it, but it was more curiosity and fun than need. The main things we would check, as Ben mentioned, color palette, but then of course scale of things was a giant issue.
Sure.
Because we have sort of different classes to make sure that the battles work, where it's like, okay, that creature's the size of this vehicle, or something as simple as that, or that the Tolkien can fit on the Sea Dragon or the factory ship, and just those sort of basic scale relationships.
Totally.
But we did have a really fun crossover set in Fire and Ash that was predominantly under Ben at Bridgehead, but it was the Ash encampment. And Ben, do you want to chat about that?
Yeah, I mean, so the Ash people we know end up at Bridgehead, and we're going to see a lot more in the movie of an encampment that they have where they kind of take up residence. Whether the dudes on the tarmac who had all their equipment shoved aside by these really terrifying Ash people, whether they liked it or not, the Ash people were moving in and making themselves at home. And what's really fun about them as a clan is that they've forsaken AWA, right? So that means certain rules are thrown out the window. So the kind of trepidation that, let's say, the Metkayina have about weapons when they were given the opportunity to use assault rifles to help, fight the RDA, the Ash love technology. They love using metal. And it's almost, Jim described it once as a kind of cargo cult sort of vibe that they have with it. And so they show up in a human environment that's full of industrial stuff and metal and da-da-da. And it's like they're kids in a candy store. And so they just start taking the material around them, like tarps and pieces of helicopter, replacement struts for a helicopter, whatever. They're not like ripping vehicles apart, but they're finding everything they can as raw material for this new living environment. But they're still Na'vi, right? They still have the swoopy design sensibilities that Dylan has done such an amazing job to invent, of how they build a marui, how do they kind of organize their living situation. And so we end up with this kind of hybrid visual cultural moment, right, where it's basically a ghetto full of Ash people made of RDA stuff that still feels very much like a kind of tribal living situation. And so it's just fun. Again, like we don't often get these chances to work directly hand in hand on something, and it's just super fun. And the other aspect of it is Dylan did an amazing job of taking weapons that the Ash people are going to use and then doing adornments to them that the Ash people do, just because, again, it's this beautiful object and they almost worship technology. So why wouldn't they decorate with both coloration of their own color palette and also bangles and skulls and little things that they put on there? And it's so much fun for me to see those crossovers.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to watch too, and the fascination with ammunition and the metals. And I love the interplay between the two. And speaking of new characters, Dylan, I'd love for you to talk about the Wind Traders, the new nomadic clan. I love the Wind Traders. They're so beautiful. Tell me about incorporating music and dance and travel into those designs, because they really are very distinct.
Yeah, I mean, the Wind Traders was the thing I was most excited to do on the sequels, like period, all the sequels. From my first meeting with our dearly departed producer, John Landau, this is way back in 2013, if you can believe it. When I was first meeting to talk about the sequels, John's like, Dylan, I want to read you some of Jim's notes. and he read an excerpt of Jim describing the Wind Traders, and it was in a very kind of poetic, evocative way about, this nomadic caravan in the sky suspended from these giant jellyfish-like creatures, backlit by the sun, lit up like paper lanterns. And I was like, I want to design this right now, like right now, like sign me up. I want to do this. And here we are, finally get to share it 12 years later. And so, yeah, I was drawn to them from the start, just from that just impactful visual, just beauty of seeing this caravan in the sky. And we looked at many different nomadic cultures, from Bedouin to the Romani to the Algari and the Turkana. And so, it's just from all different continents. We don't want to just try and reference, one people as a starting point. But what was fascinating is to see the commonality of a lot of color, a lot of assemblage, and honestly, a lot of happiness and joy and music and culture. And that we just wanted to imbue the Wind Traders with those qualities. Like it's very easy to have everyone just be, so stoic and, and all this, serious. And it's like, okay, let's have some fun. Let's have some fun with these guys. And as John used to say, they're traders. And then whenever they come to the village, they bring many goods, but the most important good of all is gossip. And so they just want to hear what the guys did in 2 villages over. And it's always a party when they come to town. And so in the design, specifically of their gondola, which was my biggest challenge on Fire and Ash, it's their home, it's a vehicle, but it's also kind of a living story of their travels and who they are as a people. So while we have this very complicated structure, it's also adorned in an interesting way, where in all the variety of rope work, we've woven in shells and trinkets and beads that are stories of where they've been, and it's this constant thing that's being added to. I really wanted to get layers of many different types of rope with subtle color differences, and all the braid differences are different. And it's nothing we, fetishize in the movie, but hopefully that layering, and that reality can come across. And we do see briefly a nice lighthearted moment where like everyone's just dancing in the we call it the deck marui. It's sort of like the deck house on a ship. And we see some of their musical instruments that, we developed in conjunction with Weta Workshop. And then also Simon Franklin was involved, and, just a super wonderful partnership. Seeing their richness and joy was a nice breath of fresh air in their culture. And the beauty of designing, because we did Way of Water and Fire and Ash as one giant production, designing basically 3 clans at once, which was the Met Hyena, the Wind Traders, and the Ash. It was extremely valuable because we knew where we were going, and in potential further films as well, we also know where we're going. So it's so helpful to reserve certain things for different clans so that you can have a clear cultural identity, because you don't want it to just be this homogenous knobby thing. They're very, very distinct. And so, something as simple as color palettes was fantastic to just, okay, so with the Met Hyena, we're going with the more brighter saturated ocean colors, the, cyans, greens, yellows. For the Wind Traders, we went much more earth tones. We did warmer earth tones. We did the burgundies, the burnt oranges, that sort of stuff. And then the ash obviously is black and white and red. The symbolism of it is just, too fun, where you got the white is the ash, the black is the burnt char and death, and then red is, blood and fire. So it just works. It's like, how do you not do that? But with the Wind Traders, yeah, we were very, very careful to create that distinction.
That's very cool. And Ben, I'd like to talk about one of your challenges in a new set piece, which was the scanner lab, which really reminded me of old school James Cameron, the first Alien. I really felt like I'd been brought back into that original ship all those years ago. Tell me how you kind of drew from classic sci-fi themes and design, but without making it overly sterile. And of course, this is where we see the character of Spider going through. So we don't want to spoil, but there's a very important plot point involving Spider in this new movie.
Indeed.
And so tell me your approach to creating this kind of intersection of the two worlds.
What's great about working on a 3D movie, right? And I'm hoping that most of the viewers of Avatar are going to go out and desperately try to find an incredible 3D cinema to watch the film in, because it's really kind of the only way to do it, is that it encourages layering, right? So Dylan was just talking about the deck marui and all the incredible details on the Wind Trader gondola. That's a kind of environment that's designed for 3D, right? That's designed with layers and with ropes, they're kind of cutting across frame and all that kind of stuff. So with the scanner lab, knowing it had to convey that this is everything about Fire and Ash is like, we saw the RDA double down in Way of Water, right? This is a triple down. Everything has to look like they spent that much more money because they're sick of getting their ass handed to them by these little blue guys, Jake Sully, pain in the ass. So, the scanner lab, like the factory ship and like other elements, the scanner lab had to convey a kind of next generation aspect to it, right? So it was bigger, than the neural lab that we'd seen in Avatar 2. It was bigger than the biolab in Avatar 1. And I wanted to have a sexiness to it, right? So I know that building things on a curving plan is a pain in the ass for everybody. That's a horrendous construction thing to have to do, but it gives a certain sophistication to the place that feels like this is, Bridgehead is becoming a fully urbanized, corporate-led, incredibly expensive endeavor. They're not giving up. They're coming back. And in the layering sense, that allowed this bigger layout allowed me to use lots of glass partition walls. There's an element that has a plastic tarping aspect to it. And so I wanted it to be a sense of sheen and glass and reflections that conveyed all this sort of production value of how seriously the RDA is taking this moment. And then layers that you could see through, right? And what's great about 3D, I was worried, I think any production designer might worry about a set with that many glass layers that you really need to meaningfully see through. It's like, are we going to get a bunch of highlights? Or is it going to be hard to read, whatever? And then my first day of on set where it was fully set up and the camera was firing, I ran out to the pod, which is a trailer outside the stage in anywhere we're shooting. But in this case, it was in Wellington, New Zealand, where Jeff Burdick's team is reviewing the stereo live, right? They're looking at a stereo tap on a stereo screen to make sure that looks cool. And the minute I got to see my set in 3D, like how it would be in the movie, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. It looked great. When we show you things in Avatar using the kind of quality stereography that Jim does, it's like you're seeing them in real life. It was as if I just walked back into the stage. I'm like, okay, I'm there. That's great. And so it's as true for a live action set as it is for digital.
Wow, that is incredible. So one thing I really liked about Fire and Ash is that the sort of moral ambiguity now of these characters. Not all the Na'vi are all good and the humans are all bad. It's sort of intermingling in this third chapter, which I really like because it leaves us questioning motives and also stereotypes that we've had of these characters over the last few movies. How do you think your production design on Fire and Ash reflects the moral ambiguity of this particular story?
Yeah, I think it allows us to be, more complex because and it's just, frankly, it's just more real, right? I mean, life exists in the grays, and that's what the world is. And so, it was nice to get away from, Navi's good, humans bad, and so, and to really embrace that. And obviously, with the introduction of the Ash Clan and Barong, we do that in a very, very dramatic fashion. And so, yeah, I think it allowed the warmth and goodness of humanity to be seen as well, in someone like Garvin, and then we get to see the bad side of Pandora. And so, for us creating that ambiguity, it was wonderful to be unleashed, sort of on Pandora with the Ash people, where instead of everything being harmonious with nature, we just get to make the anti-Na'vi basically, where they are intentionally killing, they're intentionally wasteful, they are intentionally just destructive, and all in rebellion against Awa because they're because they blame her for not saving them when a volcano took out their home. But instead of leaving, they are resilient, and they're like, nope, we will not be moved. And that's kind of what their whole ethos is with the scarification and the self-mutilation, is that it's just showing how resilient they are. It's like, how much can we take? Well, we're going to prove to everyone how much we can take. Anytime you can reinforce themes in design, it's a wonderful thing. Because like one thing that happened was, as scripted, the Ash people did not live in a burnt out great tree. It was just kind of a village in this ash wasteland. And it's sort of in discussions in the art department and then with Jim, just about, well, how would they have lived before this, and what would they be doing now, and how can we tell that? I was like, well, let's say they weren't very dissimilar from the Amaticaya, Neytiri's clan from Avatar 1, just living in a home tree. So once you made that connection, you got kind of their tragic past. And, it's sort of like every villain is the hero of their own story, right? And so you almost kind of give them a reason to show that visually was fantastic. So to kind of create this iconic silhouette of this broken great tree was a really fun, grounding thing. And again, just to turn everything on its head is fantastic.
It's very cool. And it keeps us very much on the edge of our seats. We really don't know what is coming next in the best possible way.
It's true. I mean, I can't speak to the details of it for obvious reasons, but as we know, that there have always been characters on the good guy side of things in Avatar who are scientists. Right. So we have Norm and Max, and of course, Garvin is our latest addition. The moral ambiguity of humans that have sympathy for nature and for Pandora and want to fight to protect it has always been there. But there's a huge expansion of that in Fire and Ash. So we're going to see some really surprising, really, really fun things that come out of that dynamic. And, one of the things that I do on the film is a careful scrutiny of all the holographic elements and motion graphics. And one of the things I'm always trying to do that again, we get to do in Fire and Ash is find the beauty in science, which is what drives these characters. Why is it that the scientists can understand and see the beauty of Pandora to the point where they're willing to turn on their own species when the suits cannot? Right? It's because they number one, direct physical contact with the planet, but also they understand the beauty of Awa. They understand the connectedness of the network and how people live in balance in a way that the other characters don't. And so we're going to continue that theme.
Very cool. And I was intrigued to hear James describe his ethos when it comes to design in all of his films, which he said is fantasy with limits. And I want to know what that means to you in terms of your work, and specifically on these films.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard him say that because he tends to shy away from the fantasy. But yeah, no, it's funny. We are as rooted in reality as a movie with floating mountains and 10-foot blue aliens can be. is kind of the way I like to say it. And one thing I like to, I want to touch upon is that, there's such a misconception that, it's just a big digital animated movie, right? And, nothing could be further from the truth. Obviously, What Effects does, incredible work. And I think Fire and Ash looks shockingly somehow better than Way of Water does. Like, it's amazing. And it was a privilege to work with them, hand in hand the entire way. And how we got there is by many, many, many different means. And even on, besides Ben's incredibly large, expansive, beautiful sets built down in New Zealand, there were also a lot done on my side of things that people might be surprised by. We built a 14-foot miniature of the Sully Marui, their home at Reef Village that was featured heavily both in Way of Water and Fire and Ash. That was, photographed and scanned by Weta, but then also with the Wind Traders, we came at that design and execution from everything from practical miniatures all the way to technical VR. But then when we were having to shoot a lot of things with Spider, and so we needed practical set pieces, and we engaged What a Workshop to create a bunch of unique and beautiful rope sampling to try and figure out okay, what is this textural quality and difference in their builds. And so we built many different smaller chunks of the gondola that were just beautifully detailed, and then we were able to take all that wonderful tactile reality and apply it to the rest of it. And even the tactile reality can come from our big proxy set builds, because we, when we're doing performance capture, it's not just on a flat stage. We have to approximate what the set is. And so we filled our biggest stage at MBS with a proxy for the gondola. And it had the main deck, a chunk of the below decks, also some of the ribs and some of the rigging so that we could stage these large action sequences and people running from, bow to stern and needing to know how that all interacted. And so just having that reality was fantastic. But of course, Jim being Jim, wanted to make sure that, okay, so if we're tacking port, I need to know which guys are letting out lines, which ones are pulling in. Any other director would be like, yeah, just pull on some ropes, it's fine. But he didn't know exactly how it worked. And so thankfully in our design, we had made sure that all the rigging corresponded from the gondola to the giant Medusoid, and we actually knew how to do it. So we ended up literally making a manual of how you fly this thing and rushed it down to stage so that any given scene, we could tell all the performers what they need to be doing at that given moment, and then that translates all the way through to final. So there's always some element of reality and practicality and human artistry that we try and do with every step of the way.
We did a manual too for the crab suit, which is of course the underwater amp suit. And, there was some thinking that you just working with Jim, you just have to think things through because he wants to know, he wants to make sense. Right. So how do you drive a crab suit? How do you control, four legs of this thing? I've got a toy right here I can use to demonstrate. How do I control this creature that can walk on coral and can grab onto kelp and do all these kinds of things and has four limbs in the back, right? The arms is simple. I understand that I use my arms. How do I tell it where to go? And so we had to come up with a whole scheme of how you basically ride it like a horse. Thankfully for me, my wife has a horse, and so I know about how you use leg pressure and things that are not your hands to make the creature move around. So we have these paddles, and we came up with a whole training document for the actors to know what they should be doing to make their crab suit move a certain way. So I would say, just in terms of the fantasy with limits, I would say that everybody on the film, including the actors, including everyone involved, we're basically in an act of collective imagining all the time, right? We're dealing in a world where we've got an incredible story that's sitting on paper. We know the movie is going to be, the most photoreal, most incredible resolved thing at the end of the day. But for most of our time, we're living in this in-between mode, right? Where we're seeing, the actors have to work with gray sets. We're seeing proxy versions of our virtual sets that we know are going to get detailed, are going to get turned into beautiful live action, fully photo finished sets. But we have to sort of work together through that sort of ambiguity through the act of imagining, right? We all have to keep our eyes on the prize of treating Pandora as if it's a real place, treating the technology as if it all is plausible. And I think that all pays off in the film because, I think the audiences respond emotionally to the story because they feel that Pandora is a real place. There's a reason people leave the theater and kind of wish they could go back in and stay in there, is because it's palpable on a visual and an emotional level that I think only Jim pushes people to even attempt.
So my last question for you both is, how do you think your design work on Avatar has most pushed and challenged you as artists?
Yeah, I mean, Jim demands excellence, as he should, and it's so many other production designers or directors would just be fine with if something if it looks cool, if it's pleasing, if it's neat, and with us it has to have a function and a reality to it. And so by working with Jim, it has absolutely made me a much better designer, and I enjoy that component of it. The function and the reality of it gives you unexpected results that with a naive I'm just going to, scribble something and think what I think it would be. There's so much kind of randomness and utilitarian details that exist in reality. And so, to lean into that and, accept something unexpected to create something unique is the power of it. And yes, it has for sure made me a much better designer.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've all worked for a lot of different people. I would say that, if you're working on good movies, you're typically working for demanding directors or demanding leaders of some kind. And there's a version of that that's kind of about taste, that's about trying to figure out somebody's taste, like what are the kinds of things this person likes. And sometimes it's mercurial, but you sort of you get little glimpses and you try to figure it out. What's amazing about Jim is he's a great teacher to us in the process. And he's also, every time he's demanding about something, it's not about taste. It's about the thing doesn't serve the story properly. The thing is too confusing visually. People won't get it in the 10 frames that it takes the human brain to kind of comprehend what it's looking at in a shot. People will be confused, right? He's essentially advocating for the audience all the time. So I think looking at any kind of filmmaking effort of any kind, really even editing or just whatever part of the process, but particularly design from that perspective, is very different and kind of illuminating because you realize that your job isn't just to show something cool. It's to lead someone's awareness and consciousness through a story, right? And so you might make totally different choices. You might design something that doesn't feel great if you stare at it as an image, as a photo, or as an illustration for 20 seconds straight. But that's not how you're going to see it in the movie. So look at it through the lens of how you're going to really see it, and maybe something that has a more evocative, emotional kind of design to it is the right choice to make in those instances, right? And even with designs that are hyper detailed and hyper realistic, I feel like it was our first day where he said, "What's the metaphor? Find a metaphor," and he's driven that into us. And so trying to find designs that work on both levels, that can be both could be stared at for 20 seconds and hold up to the scrutiny of an aeronautics engineer that's looking at how the wings work and is that actually going to work, and also makes you feel scared, makes a 10-year-old kid feel scared because the thing looks like it kind of has a mouth and has a creature-like quality. Of course, I'm talking about the Sea Dragon, but also this relates to the new factory ship in Fire and Ash. I think being able to fire on those different cylinders, and then of course there's just Jim, the practical filmmaker that is just thinking about how do you get through your day, how do you wile the walls, how do you create a layout that's going to work. And so if you can hit all 3 points of those triangles, you're doing a good job. And once you've learned to do that as well as he demands that we do it, 100%, it has a huge impact on everything you're going to do going forward.
Well, thank you both so much for your time. I've learned so much about your process and even more about Avatar Fire and Ash. And I can't wait for fans to discover this latest chapter and also just see your magical work, hopefully on a big screen.
In 3D.
Indeed. Thank you so
3D,
much.
yes.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank Dylan and Ben for joining me on this special episode of the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen. Tune in for more conversations with other artisans from Avatar Fire and Ash. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. Thank you so much for listening.